Hello and welcome to another of InDialogue Foundation's session for the course Dialogue Studies for the session 2022 and 23. Today we have with us Dr. Vaibhav Abnave, and he will be delivering the session today, and I will be moderating it. The topic for Vaibhav's interactive session is, can there be a dialogue between religion of rules and religion of principles? Some remarks on Ambedkar's reinvention of the name religion. Dr. Abnave is an independent researcher and filmmaker. His research interests lie at the intersection of politics, history, and philosophy. Through his films, he explores the intersection of theatre and cinema, documentary, and fiction. He has taught courses in international politics, documentary filmmaking, and theatre studies at various educational institutions, including the Central University of Gujarat and the FLAME University Pune. Also the National Institute of Design and the Symbiosis Institute of Mass Communication. His films, Blur, 2008, and Monologue, 2013, have been shown at various international film festivals. Presently, he is finishing a new docu-fiction feature titled I Am Only Making a Report, and teaching as an assistant professor, direction and screenwriting at the Film and Television Institute of India at Pune. So Vaibhav, you have up to 2 hours for this session, which you can divide any which way you want. You can also ask the participants to ask any questions they have along the way or at the end, however you like to proceed. So welcome, Dr. Abnave, and you may begin now.
Thank you so much, Behzad, and thank you so much, Alia. So I would like to divide the time in two parts. First, I will make a presentation, maybe for 50 minutes or so, and then we can open it up to discussion. Does that work? Okay. So I would like to divide the presentation itself in two parts. In the first part, I would like to look at what Ambedkar does with the common word religion. So I would first have to begin with like to establish what do we mean by common word, or what is a common word. So that which is not specialized, technical, or even sacred, it is not only common. Religion in this case is also an inescapable and highly contentious, explosive word too, which needs to be thought than merely evaded or disavowed. And yet we are surrounded by various evasions of not the word religion as such, which is abundantly used almost everywhere, but the question articulated through this common word religion. How to think and actualize what Marx called generic humanity. I believe that is the question at the heart of religion. That how to think and actualize human society, which is not reducible to any particular predicates of identity or attributes defined in linguistic, cultural, racial, gender terms, but as that which recognizes thought as the only universal human capacity. So if we take this as the starting point, then what kind of evasions do we see around us, evasions of this common word religion? The first I would name, and this is a schematization, of course, there are a great deal of overlaps in it. So the first kind of evasion I call rationalist and atheist evasion. And the summary statement is, we don't need religion, for it is a thing of the pre-modern past. The second is a secular evasion, that let religion be a private and personal affair and should not be a matter of common social public life. Third is what I call humanist evasion, that all religions are equal and true. All religions teach humanism. And a fourth is a very peculiar evasion, which I would call Hindu evasion, which is Hinduism is not a religion, but a culture, a civilization, a way of life, which not only respects cultural, but also religious differences within a certain limits. And then lastly, a evasion which is more within the academic field, which I call post-colonial or decolonial evasion, which is religion is a Western, European, to be specific, Semitic category, which cannot be imposed upon the non-West, for it cannot really capture the cultural differences beyond the West and cannot be used to classify the complex mosaic of Indic traditions into a monolithic or straitjacket called Hinduism, defined as religion. Thus, not only Hinduism is not a religion, but Hinduism does not exist. It is an Orientalist invention during the colonial times. This is what one could summarize as the post-colonial or decolonial evasion. Now coming to Ambedkar and what he does to the common word religion. What Ambedkar does is that he does not evade the religion question, but thinks it both critically and creatively. Since religion question remains unresolved even in our times, Ambedkar not only remains our contemporary, but through his prescient insights awaits us somewhere in uncertain future. So while thinking with Ambedkar on the religion question, it needs to be kept in mind that Ambedkar is simultaneously a critical and a creative thinker of religion as such, which is what is religion? Why do we need religion? What is the function of religion? While being a keen student of specific historical names of religions like Islam, Christianity, Sikhism, and he is also especially a partisan yet clinical diagnostician of a specific historical religion, namely Hinduism. And lastly, a partisan yet creative inventor of a new proper name of religion as such for our times, which is Navayan. Now let's come to the question, which is what Ambedkar does with the common word religion. Or to be specific, the uncommon operation Ambedkar does on this common word religion. This uncommon operation is that religion is not a mere word, but a name. To be specific, a generic name. Now, what is a generic name? Before that, let's quickly look at what we mean by name, actually. We know that a name, we know what a name is. Name is that which names a thing. And that thing can be a place, a person, an object, a relation, a process, etc. And if we were to consider religion as a name, then we commonly associate either it with some God, if not something divine, otherworldly, heavenly, transcendental, and most importantly, the relation this transcendental sphere has with the world we inhabit. So this world and the other world, human world, which is mediated by prophets and priests. And this relation is codified by observance of certain rituals and festivals and sacrificial practices, and so on. So essentially, we commonly make sense of this name religion through a presumed separation between this and the other world. An invocation of this other world is not only meant to explain the origin of universe, why it came into existence, who brought it into existence, how it would come to an end, etc. But also, and more importantly, this divine or transcendental mediation is meant to regulate the relationship between man and man, telling how this relation is to be conducted and so on. So, of course, this divine mediation and intervention is also meant as a promise of salvation, liberation, alleviation of human suffering, deliverance of justice. If not in this, then in the other world, through the interplay of rewards and punishments and so on. Yet the moment we associate religion in this way, we are no longer referring to religion as a name in any precise, unequivocal sense, but we are referring to a cluster which shares what Ludwig Wittgenstein calls a certain family resemblance. And we generally make sense of what this cluster concretely implies by referring to certain specific names like Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, etc. So instead of religion being a name in any concrete sense, we already reduce religion to certain historical names. So instead of it being a generic name, religion in this sense becomes a general name, a general category, an umbrella category within which these specific particular names of historical religions can be clubbed. So under this general name, we can think about its concrete manifestation through particular names of religion. So instead of religion in the singular sense, we use it as always already plural, that there are religions, where essentially plurality of religions imply a plurality of peoples, that there are peoples. So there are religions and there are peoples belonging to those specific religions. So like there are religions like Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, there are peoples like Jews, Christians, Muslims, Hindus, people of this book or that book, or people without any specific book, etc. Now, the problem is when we come to what we call modernity in historical sense, this plurality of religions and peoples pose a dual problem. On the one hand, the presumed superiority of the divine realm over the profane realm, this world, becomes unsustainable due to the intervention of science. So on the one hand, the plurality of religions and peoples cause increasingly more hatred, conflict, violence in the profane world, in this world, while continuing to promise salvation in the other world. The secular evasion of this conundrum caused by a plurality of religions and peoples is to separate this world and the other world, to divide the authorities over these two worlds into state and church, for instance, to make religions into a private affair of peoples, while establishing some kind of civic realm where peoples as plurality can coexist harmoniously, or at least without harming each other's private interests. But this secular evasion is not only insufficient, but also ineffective to solve the problem posed by plurality of religions and peoples. And it also goes against the true modern conviction. For the true modern conviction is twofold. Not only that there is only this world, but people are indivisible. We, the people, the subject of politics, emerged through the French Revolution, no longer swear by this book or that book, but wager upon certain universal principles: liberty, equality, fraternity. These universal principles do not derive their universality from any external authority, be it God or king. These principles are self-founded. In other words, they are axiomatic. Like axioms in mathematics, they are universal and also eternal. They are truths. Though these truths have emerged at a particular point in history, once they are declared, they have a retrospective effect on the past, when they were not accepted as axiomatic principles, as much as they have a bearing on the future. So that is what we mean by eternal, that they are historical and eternal. They emerge in history and yet have retrospective effect on the past and effect on the future. This is what Professor Shaumyavrata Chaudhary in his book on Ambedkar calls reversible eternity. Now, the change modernity poses is to change this world, for there is no other world. In the light of these new truths, new principles, which are both new and eternal at once, the question is, who will bring about this change? And the answer is people, that is anyone who decides to think these principles in one's own voice, draw concrete consequences from them, while remaining subject to infinite and inexhaustible possibilities opened up by these principles: liberty, equality, and fraternity. So people are the subject of politics in two senses: subject in the active sense, that who take charge of their own destiny, for there is no God or heavens, as well as subject in passive sense, those who subject themselves to these principles. So people are both their own masters who actualize their mastery over their own destiny by voluntarily becoming servants of these people, of these principles. Thus, the modern challenge is to change this world in two senses. First is by converting peoples as plurality into a people as singularity. And the second is to convert religions as plurality into a religion as singularity. So to change this world is essentially to convert pluralities into singularities under the sign of universal principles. So religion as a singular is unthinkable without the universality of principles. So religion as a singularity requires one to begin from the universality of principles. It's the universality of these principles which provides both an orientation to the process of becoming singular and also an infinite and immortal horizon to this process. And without these, this world would saturate into a mere finite or mortal world. So what these principles do is that they orient this world and also infinitize it, saves it from being just a finite mortal world, opens up infinite horizon in a historical sense. Now, it's important to keep in mind that Ambedkar uses the common word religion uncommonly as a singularity, as a generic name, which derives its genericity not from any god or external authority, but from three axiomatic universal principles of collective existence: liberty, equality, and fraternity. Ambedkar brings out the axiomaticity of these principles in the most lucid way when he says, principle must live by itself and not by the authority of man. If the principle needs the authority of man, it is no principle. This I'm quoting from Buddha and his Dhamma. Ambedkar condenses dispositional consequences of these three principles, consequences on the plane of conduct. So dispositional consequences of these three principles into one common word, morality, and declares that man and morality must be the center of religion. If not, religion is a cruel superstition. It is not enough for morality to be the ideal of life. Since there is no God, it must become the law of life. Yet the law here should not be taken in any juridical sense or legal sense, for there is no separate lawmaker or lawgiver here. It is a law which people give to themselves as their own masters and yet as subject of this law. They would allow themselves their own habits, their own conduct, their own dispositions to change by becoming subject to this law. And Ambedkar is very clear that religion is an influence or force suffused through the life of each individual, modulating his character, determining his actions and reactions, his likes and dislikes. So religion is that force which shapes the conduct, the disposition. So religion for Ambedkar is a generic name of that force, that intensity, which activates an infinite process of actualizing the dispositional consequences of these three inexhaustible principles: liberty, equality, and fraternity. For there is no change of this world, the world of inequalities, exploitation, oppression, subjugation, without there being dispositional change. So structural change needs to be supplanted with dispositional change. And Ambedkar uses another common word for this dispositional change: conversion. So there is no structural change of this world sustainable without there being dispositional or subjective change, that is conversion. Thus, with shattering lucidity, Ambedkar declares the function of religion is to reconstruct the world, not to explain its origin or its end. Again, from Buddha and his Dhamma. So under the sign of this singular universal idea of religion, Ambedkar takes problem of the plurality of religions head on. He is very clear that if the function of religion is to reconstruct the world, to make it just, then not every religion is worth having. So this is another quotation from Buddha and his Dhamma, where he says that if this is the function, which is to reconstruct the world, then perhaps not every religion is worth having. There is no obvious self-evident equality of religions. There is no neutral position from which one can study religions with scholarly distance without making a subjective evaluation of these religions. What Ambedkar calls a certain comparative study, but a comparative study from a partisan subjective position of evaluation, which also involves making a subjective decision on proper names of religion, and which would entail accepting certain name while rejecting others. So, in other words, if the name religion articulates certain universal idea, then one needs to take a partisan position vis-a-vis the name one chooses in order to express its express its true function and also expose its misuse or misnaming. So we start from the universal idea of religion and come to the decision on the proper names. Now, from Ambedkar's uncommon operation on the common word or the generic name religion, we'll now turn towards Ambedkar's concrete, subjective, and partisan decisions on two proper names of religion, Hinduism and Buddhism. At times, Ambedkar would also refer to this differentiation between Hinduism and Buddhism as dharma and dhamma. So in case of Hinduism, Ambedkar takes a dual position. On the one hand, Ambedkar firmly states that Hinduism is not a religion. In The Annihilation of Caste, a text which I distributed before the talk, he declares that the Hindu religion, as contained in the Vedas and Smritis, is nothing but a mass of sacrificial, social, political, and sanitary rules and regulations, all mixed up. Religion, in the sense of spiritual principle, truly universal, applicable to all races, to all countries, to all times, is not to be found in them. And if it is, it does not form the governing part of Hindu's life. To put it in plain language, what the Hindus call religion is really law, or at best legalized class ethics. The first evil of such a code of ordinances misrepresented to the people as religion is that it tends to deprive moral life of freedom and spontaneity and to reduce it to a more or less anxious and servile conformity to externally imposed rules. Under it, there is no loyalty to ideals, there is only conformity to commands. Yet this position is not to be mistaken with the Hindu evasion position, that Hinduism is not a religion, but only a way of life. No, Ambedkar is saying something else when he says Hinduism is not a religion. In fact, he's saying exactly the opposite, quite the contrary. Through the denial of Hinduism as a religion, Ambedkar introduces a philosophical separation between the generic name religion and its terrible misuse, the distinction between religion as idea and its mere mask. So the name here is basically detached or separated from the idea, from the thing. And at the same time, what he's doing on the other hand is that Ambedkar is also naming Hinduism as religion, only to expose the misuse of this generic name. Immediately after calling Hinduism a religion, he makes an unequivocal declaration: I have therefore no hesitation in saying that such a religion must be destroyed. And I say there is nothing irreligious in working for the destruction of such a religion. Indeed, I hold that it is your bounden duty to tear the mask, to remove the misrepresentation that has been caused by misnaming this law as religion. And this is a provocation. This is, in some sense, he's asking those who have invited him to deliver this undelivered lecture. And he says, so long as people look upon Hinduism as religion, they will not be ready for a change. Because the idea of religion is, generally speaking, not associated with the idea of change. But the idea of law is associated with the idea of change. And when people come to know that what is called religion is really law, and they would realize that this law is old and archaic, they will be ready for a change. For people know and accept that law can be changed. So the old and archaic law can be changed by new universal principles. So naming Hinduism as a religion not only allows Ambedkar to expose the misuse of the generic name religion, but it also allows him to impart certain ideological and political coherence to the name Hindu, which the name culture and civilization would not allow. It allows him to name the unnameable empty center of this shape-shifting, fluid, amorphous monstrosity called Hinduism. And this empty center is nothing but the perpetual proliferation of graded hierarchy, that is caste, which survives its infinite mutations. And Ambedkar warns us that caste is not an aberration or deformation of Hinduism, but it enjoys doctrinal, scriptural sanction. Caste is Hinduism. Caste is the religion of Hindus. Ambedkar categorically states it must be recognized that the Hindus observe caste not because they're inhuman or wrong-headed. They observe caste because they are deeply religious. So naming Hinduism as religion to expose the secular evasion which suppresses the impasse of the Indian political situation than confronting it. And what is this impasse? It is nothing but the imperfectible and insidious mutation of political majority into communal majority. The numerical into communal. The rotational into static. So as we know that political majority is fluctuating, rotational, it can be made and unmade through electoral means, but communal majority cannot simply be unmade through electoral means. It can only be destroyed by destroying the misuse of the generic name religion. Ambedkar mobilizes the generic name religion as an instrument to destroy, to annihilate not only the caste, but also the permanent communal majority, which is founded upon this misuse. And yet this instrument can only be activated through another proper name. And for Ambedkar, that another proper name is Dhamma, Buddhism, Navayan. So Buddhism not only brought about the revolutionary change in ancient Indian history, but Ambedkar's conviction is that it could alone resolve the modern tension between the three principles, liberty, equality, and fraternity, which Marx sought to solve through another generic name, communism. So this first part I would end with a passage from Ambedkar's last speech, Buddha or Marx, where he points towards the possible historical resolution of the tension between liberty, equality, fraternity. He says, man must grow materially as well as spiritually. Society has been aiming to lay a new foundation, as summarized by French Revolution in these three words, fraternity, liberty, and equality. The French Revolution was welcomed because of this slogan. It failed to produce equality. We welcome the Russian Revolution because it aims to produce equality. But it cannot be too much emphasized that in producing equality, society cannot afford to sacrifice fraternity or liberty. Equality will be of no value without fraternity or liberty. It seems that the three can coexist only if one follows the way of the Buddha. These are his concluding words in the text Buddha and Marx at Kathmandu in 1956. Now, from here on, I want to go to the second part, where I want to introduce the other term which we have obliquely touched upon, which is philosophy. And start with a statement Ambedkar makes in Philosophy of Hinduism. Philosophy is concerned with knowing truth. Religion is concerned with the love of truth. Now, this line from Ambedkar's Philosophy of Hinduism, which is a work of extraordinary erudition and shattering insights, as we know, provokes us to think now the relation between these two names. Now, along with revolution and counter-revolution in ancient India and riddles in Hinduism, this work, Philosophy of Hinduism, forms a kind of triptych, a trilogy of Ambedkar's rigorous, systematic, and scathing critique of Hinduism as an ideology which officially propagates inequality, unfreedom, and callous indifference. An ideology whose everyday effects are too real, chaotic, shape-shifting, and devastatingly violent to maintain a cognitive awareness of its cold-blooded systemicity. And yet Ambedkar, while performing an ideological critique of Hinduism, uses the word philosophy and titles his work Philosophy of Hinduism. Is he simply equating philosophy with ideology, using them synonymously or interchangeably to suggest that philosophy of Hinduism is nothing but an ideology, where ideology is nothing but distortion of truth, disservice to truth, and so on? It'll become clear in the course of our discussion later that Ambedkar is neither equating philosophy with ideology nor using them interchangeably. Now, before we discuss what the word philosophy is doing in the title of this work in conjunction with Hinduism, let's return to the citation with which we began this second part. Philosophy is concerned with knowing truth. Religion is concerned with the love of truth. Now, on the one hand, a superficial reading of this citation may produce an impression that for Ambedkar, there is a presumed hierarchy between philosophy and religion, where philosophy has mere conceptual, theoretical, abstract, that is cold, distant, objective, almost an academic relation with truth, while religion has a concrete, experiential, visceral, affective, intensely personal, subjective relation with truth. It may appear that for Ambedkar, the superiority of religion over philosophy is essentially the superiority of loving over mere knowing. For many, this inferred superiority of religion over philosophy would also resonate with and would be homologous to the contemporary debate where embodied experience is argued to be superior to abstract theory in both ethical and political sense. Yet, a speculative reading of Ambedkar thought, as suggested forcefully and demonstrated brilliantly by Soumyavrata Chaudhary in Ambedkar and Other Immortals, the methodology he's proposing there, the speculative methodology, could open up another way of thinking the relation between philosophy and religion, as Ambedkar talks about in this statement. So to begin, one can't help noticing that Ambedkar is making two crucial moves here. First, he triangulates the relation between religion and philosophy through a third common term, or a third common word here, truth. Ambedkar makes it clear that at the inauguration of both philosophy and religion, there is truth. We can also name it as principle, thought, that which is universal. If it were not for the coming into existence of truth in this world, neither philosophy nor religion would have any meaning whatsoever. And truth is neither philosophical and religious in its origin, which is to say, neither philosophy nor religion have any special claim nor any privileged access to truth. Truth is axiomatic, self-founded. It is immanent, this worldly, and universal, which is for anyone. So the relation between philosophy and religion can only be thought in the light of their respective relation with truth, which none of them possess. Now comes a second move where Ambedkar says religion is concerned with the love of truth. Here one can't help noticing an allusion to the literal meaning of the word philosophy, which is love of wisdom. One could speculate that Ambedkar wants to produce certain effect through the word religion, which was similar to the one produced in the ancient Athens through the word philosophy. And if one were to ask what was that intended effect, the answer to the question would be that the nature of truth itself and why one needs to love the truth than merely knowing it, one would get that what would be that intended effect. So the nature of truth is, to use contemporary French philosopher Alain Badiou's precise term, the nature of truth is objective, which is to say that one cannot have mere objective, factual, empirical, or neutral access to truth without there being subjective and partisan commitment to truth. A commitment which at once propels exceptional change in the life of the committed and also the world in which she lives. A commitment which produces subjective indifference towards the worldly measurable gains like power, prestige, status, money, and in return gives immeasurable happiness. So in other words, truth is not reducible to mere knowledge, but truth is that which inaugurates an exceptional and inexhaustible process of change in this world, a process of subjective as well as social change. And such a change becomes thinkable, becomes actual only when one loves truth passionately and freely, without ever caring about one's own death. So, in other words, when one loves truth, one lives as if one is an immortal. In the ancient Athens, the Platonic usage of the creating a new desire for truth, a desire which would create a disinterest towards material goods. No wonder this Socratic Platonic effect met with a serious political allegation in its time, that of corrupting the youth. Now one would ask if Ambedkar intended to create a similar effect, that of invoking the love of truth by using the word religion, then why did not he use the word philosophy itself? Why he wants to produce this new effect of loving the truth by using the word religion than philosophy? Did Ambedkar had certain apathy towards the word philosophy? Or was it the other way around, that Ambedkar uses these two words, philosophy and religion, almost interchangeably and synonymously? Now, a clear look at the passage from which this citation is taken. Philosophy is concerned with knowing truth and religion is concerned with the love of truth. If one looks at this passage, it could help us begin to think through some of these questions. The passage opens as follows. The Atman and Brahman were once was the truth, the great truth, which the Upanishads said they had discovered. And they ask man to know this truth. The philosophers of Upanishads did not realize that to know truth was not enough. One must learn to love truth. The difference between philosophy and religion may be put in two ways. Philosophy is concerned with knowing truth, religion is concerned with the love of truth. So this is the entire passage from which this line is taken. If one reads the entire passage, it becomes clear that Ambedkar's problem is not with the word philosophy per se, the way it was used by the ancient Athenians to create a new desire for truth. He has no problems with that. His problem is with the philosophers of Upanishads, who did not realize that to know truth was not enough. If one reads the above mentioned passage from Philosophy of Hinduism along with another passage from Riddles in Hinduism, his differentiated stance vis-a-vis Brahmaism, that is philosophy of Upanishads, and the word philosophy as used by ancient Athenians becomes clearer. So Ambedkar writes, if all persons are part of Brahma, then all are equal and all must enjoy the same liberty, which is what democracy means, which is to recognize and realize that you and I are part of the same cosmic principle, leaves no room for no other theory of associated life except democracy. The question is, what happened to this doctrine of Brahmaism? It is quite obvious that Brahmaism had no social effects. It was not made the basis of dharma. When asked why this happened, the answer is that Brahmaism is only philosophy, as though philosophy arises not out of social life, but out of nothing and for nothing. So this is where I close this quote from Riddles in Hinduism. In this quote, it becomes clearer that Ambedkar's objection is not to the word philosophy as coined by the ancient Athenians, but what he thought to be its reduction by the Upanishadkars, reduction of Brahmaism to being mere or only philosophy, having no social effects, having no impact upon subjective desire for the truth. In another text, Ranade, Gandhi, and Jinnah, Ambedkar extends this objection to an entire field of what he calls Hindu philosophy, within which he situates Brahmaism. And he writes, Hindu philosophy, whether it is Vedanta, Sankhya, Nyaya, Vaisheshik, has moved in its own circle without in any way affecting the Hindu religion. It has never had the courage to challenge this gospel. That Hindu philosophy that everything is Brahma remained only a matter of intellect, it never became a social philosophy. The Hindu philosophers had both their philosophy and their manu held apart in two hands, the right not knowing what the left hand. The Hindu is never troubled by this inconsistency between Brahmaism on one hand and Manusmriti on the other. So Ambedkar's shattering distinction between Hindu philosophy and what he calls social philosophy at once exposes the asocial nature of Hindu philosophy, while affirming the effects of a philosophy worthy of its name as essentially social. So in a way, for Ambedkar, if one is using the word philosophy, one should essentially use it as social. So his objection to the capture of the word philosophy by the name Hindu becomes even sharper as he moves from Hindu philosophy to what he calls philosophy of Hinduism. So if the former, despite its intellectual richness, complexity, and subtlety, remained only a matter of intellect, remained only philosophy having no social effects or real material consequences for this world, then the latter, which is philosophy of Hinduism, was overtly and officially anti-social. In another passage of philosophy of Hinduism, Ambedkar writes that what is the explanation of absence of fraternity among the Hindus? And Ambedkar writes, it is Hinduism and its philosophy that is responsible for the absence of fraternity. There is no sharing among Hindus of joys and sorrows involved in the vital facts of life. Everything is separate and exclusive. With a complete refusal to share the joys and sorrows of life, how can the sentiment of fraternity take root? The question of all question is, why do the Hindus refuse to share the joys and sorrows of life? It needs no saying that he refuses to share because his religion tells him not to share them. This conclusion need cause no surprise. For what does Hinduism teach? It teaches not to interdine, not to intermarry, not to associate. The philosophy of Hinduism is a direct denial of fraternity. Against this officially anti-social philosophy of Hinduism, Ambedkar continues to affirm the inexhaustible possibilities opened by the ancient Athenian usage of the word philosophy. So in Riddles in Hinduism, he writes, philosophy is no purely theoretic matter. It has practical potentialities. Philosophy has its roots in the problems of life, and whatever theories philosophy propounds must return to society as instruments of reconstructing society. It is not enough to know. So from this quote in Riddles in Hinduism, it is quite clear that for Ambedkar, philosophy in its true sense is not about mere knowing in a theoretical sense, but about reconstructing society, changing the world. In other words, the task of philosophy is to produce social effects, subjective and social change, not through mere knowledge of truth, but out of the love and passion for the truth. But did not Ambedkar say that religion is concerned with the love of truth? Does that mean that for Ambedkar, the word philosophy and religion are interchangeable and synonymous? The question which we had posed earlier. And at this point, it would be useful to turn to the last few lines of that passage from Philosophy of Hinduism. After stating philosophy is concerned with knowing truth, religion is concerned with the love of truth, Ambedkar writes, philosophy is static, religion is dynamic. These differences are merely two aspects of one and the same thing. Philosophy is static because it is concerned only with the knowing truth. Religion is dynamic because it is concerned with the love of truth. So this passage makes it clear that for Ambedkar, at one level, both philosophy and religion are same, insofar as both are concerned with truth. But at another level, they are different. One is static, the other being dynamic. Now, everything hinges upon how we read the two predicates, static and dynamic. Again, a superficial and in a certain sense commonsensical reading would suggest an implicit hierarchy between the words static and dynamic, where the latter, the dynamic, could be taken to be superior and desirable than the former. For static is that which is standstill, rigid, resistant to change, and thus dead, while dynamic is that which is flexible, moving, changing, alive, and so on. Yet if we resist the temptation of such a reading, then another speculative reading of these two predicates, static and dynamic, is thinkable, where the relation between static and dynamic is to be thought dialectically, than preferring one over the other. And also keeping in mind that both static and dynamic are no merely attributes of philosophy and religion, but they tell us something about how truth emerges or comes into existence in this world. So if the emergence of truth in this world has to be grasped dialectically, then one has to keep in mind that truth emerges in a concrete historical situation, producing exceptional change in that situation. And yet this truth is at once eternal, axiomatic, immutable. That is, if it is true, then it has to be true for any situation, future as well as past. So in other words, truth produces what Shaumevrata Chaudhary calls reversible eternity, as we saw, having at once retrospective effect on the past as well as anticipatory effect on the future to come. So if one approaches static and dynamic in dialectical manner, then static can be read as referring to the eternal, axiomatic, universal, and infinite validity of any truth, while dynamic can be read as historical, material, emancipatory, and dispositional consequences produced by the contingent emergence and intervention of truth in a situation in this world. So in other words, static refers to the eternity of truths, while dynamic refers to the effectivity of truth, which is always historical. So for example, the truth of equality declared at Mahad has all these three layers: axiomatic, predicative, and dispositional. So axiomatic, that which is not bound by any situation, time, and space, which is not historical. But the effect of this truth requires you to equalize the unequals. That is where the predicative equality comes, which is equality of opportunity, of resources, and so on and so forth. And the dispositional equality is where you have to modulate, change the conduct vis-a-vis others. So that both the predicative and dispositional would be the dynamic part, whereas axiomatic would be, in some sense, the static part. So we can speculate that for Ambedkar, the relation between philosophy, which is static, and religion, which is dynamic, is essentially dialectical. They are same and yet different. And these differences are merely two aspects of one and the same thing. So one could speculate that Ambedkar suggests a dialectical interplay of identity and difference between these two words, philosophy and religion, where philosophy affirms the eternity of truth, separating it from mere opinions, while religion activates effectivity of truth in history. So both philosophy and religion, in their true sense, create a new subjective desire for truth, but they do it differently. Now, taking off from Alabadhio, one could suggest that philosophy creates desire for truth by subtracting itself from the actual effectivity of truth unfolding in history. And the truths unfold in history through distinct truth processes. Alabadhio names them as science, love, art, and politics. Essentially, these are four creative processes through which truths emerge, actualize, and unfold in history. So while religion not only creates desire for truth, but also sustains the effectivity and organizes the consequences of political truth. So in this case, liberty, equality, fraternity, and the tension between the three principles. So how to resolve that tension and how to sustain their effectivity and organize the consequence of these political truths, that's where religion as a name becomes crucial, by giving a concrete material form to collective coexistence. So in short, the dialectical relation between philosophy and religion can only be grasped if one triangulates it with the third term, political truth or political truth process. So only then the dialectical relationship as proposed by Ambedkar between philosophy and religion can be further grasped when we look at the two simultaneous operations Ambedkar performed on both these words, philosophy and religion. And in order to perform these simultaneous operations, Ambedkar does not begin with either of them. He does not begin either with philosophy or religion. He begins with political truths, or what he calls principles, which are universal, axiomatic, and produce material dispositional consequences in history. So on the one hand, he approaches the word religion from the side of philosophy, producing a philosophical separation between religion of rules, dharma or Hinduism, and on the other side, religion of principles, Dhamma or Buddhism. So on the other hand, he approaches the word philosophy from the side of religion and mark certain religions, or to be specific, political separation between mere philosophy, which is scholastic theoretical philosophy, mere knowing, and he separates that from social philosophy, which has its roots in problems of life and which returns to society as instruments of reconstructing society. So he uses one term to separate the other, but only because there is the third term, which is truth and universal principles. So by subjecting both these words to the test of universality, he says we need to separate religion of rules and religion of principles, and mere knowing and love of truth, or neutral, scholastic, theoretical, academic philosophy and social philosophy. So through these simultaneous operations, Ambedkar dialecticizes both philosophy and religion, producing certain split or division into both these words, philosophy and religion. And this simultaneous dialectical operation, which takes off from truths, political truths, liberty, equality, fraternity as the starting point, once again remind us that truth divides. Each of these splits or divisions are mediated, or to be precise, triangulated by truths only to illuminate each of them in the light of other, by raising both fundamental questions, what is philosophy and what is religion? And the division which is produced by truth brings us to the question, which is at the title of today's talk, that can there be a dialogue between religion of rules and religion of principles? And the answer which Ambedkar speculates is that there cannot be, because one is on the side of the universality of principles, whereas the other is interested in mere rules. Rules which deny fraternity, rules which separate, segregate, and officially endorses graded hierarchy. So these are, I think, the initial remarks. I'll pause here, and now we can open up for the questions.
Anyone who has a question may raise their hand.
Hello.
Yeah.
Hello, my name is Imran. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah. You say that religion and philosophy kind of do not have a claim to truth. Am I right?
What I meant here was that they don't have exclusive privileged access or possession of truth. They have a relation to truth.
They have a relation to truth. Okay.
Yeah. So, truth is neither religious or philosophical. That's what I mean. The truth is truth.
Yes. Yeah, truth is truth. That can be a perspective, I feel. But if you read the Quran, for example, there it is explicitly written that this is the truth.
Mm-hmm.
Allah is the truth.
Right.
Or God is the truth. Right. So religion per se has an idea of truth, and it's the God. And so how do you like again, what I'm saying can also be a perspective. What you say is also a perspective. But the question of truth somewhere boils down to an other which is the truth. And I feel an other which is someone apart from the human beings, the other, which is the truth. And I feel from my experience of being born and living a life and doing philosophy and writing MPhil, I've gone through some stages in my life, and I've had first-hand experiences that has brought me to a conclusion that there are higher powers. I have experienced higher powers in my life. So I would say there is truth. There are people, there is a higher truth than us, and it is there out there. Maybe some people get it, some people don't. No. And explicitly in the religion, it is said that this is the truth. So why should we say now that it's not the truth? It's a very postmodern term. So this is what I want to say.
What is postmodern?
Like that there is no truth, or it's relational.
But I'm not saying that there is no truth. I'm just saying that it cannot be exclusively claimed as either religion or philosophy having exclusive claim. But I think where I differ from you is that for me, that affirmation of truth does not require there be other world. But I completely agree with the second proposition that affirmation requires something which is not merely human in a mortal finite sense. So yes, truth affirms that there is something which is inhuman or infinite, in a sense, the other. So I completely agree the second proposition.
No, I also
don't
agree
think
with
there
you.
is any relationship between the infinite, immortal, and the other world. So that is where
No. I also agree with you when you say that you agree to the truth, which is this worldly truth, right?
No,
like
but in a way, this worldly and yet infinite and immortal. So this worldly does not mean that it is not exceptional. Yeah. So it is exceptional. Because, it's not finite and mortal.
Okay, so Reshmi would like to ask a question now. Reshmi has her hand raised. Reshmi, please go ahead.
Sorry, I'm like staggered with a lot of congestion, and I think everyone should take care. Some flow is back. But hello, thank you, Vaibhav, for this. I think it was a reading that you were sharing, and some pertinent questions, not questions, but thoughts have really triggered me. One is that the idea of religion, that you kind of put it in a context of understanding whether it should be considered as against philosophy, and whether truth is tenable, as in the truth that Ambedkar is trying to bring to us. My first premise is that if you have to critique Ambedkar as a scholar or as a filmmaker, and not critique because you want to critique, but critique because there is a possibility to critique, then what would be your position? That is one question. The second is, when you're discussing dialectical relationship of philosophy and religion, and then when Ambedkar says that, he brings out the antithesis of Hinduism by saying that it is not just a way of life. By saying that it is just a way of life, you are kind of neglecting the fact that religion is used to technically hierarchize this Indian society, even if, because it is also kind of appropriating caste. Hinduism as a religion is not just religion, but it is also appropriating caste, which is now getting transmitted to, or now getting transferred to other religion, because even if Islam doesn't follow casteism, or Sikhism doesn't follow casteism, but because there is conversion, okay, and because, so then coming back to, because there is conversion, of course, then the caste also travels from Hinduism to the other religion. So I would like to ask you, therefore, that how would Ambedkar or any other philosopher, who would you like to bring to argue in terms of moral principles of religion and its proposition that Ambedkar is arguing? These are my 2 points. Sure. Thank you.
Yeah. No, thank you, Rashmi. So, to responding to the first question, I think if we take critique as an act of love, as Immanuel Kant proposes, then what would say that what Ambedkar actually has opened up is a universal, immense, and in some sense, an unfinished and ongoing project. So the task of critique would mean to extend the consequences of Ambedkar thought by taking a responsibility for that extension. So the act of conversion and the thought of conversion, which Ambedkar was working on intensely for more than 2 decades, that he was moving away from Hinduism and moving towards the new name which he wanted to choose for himself, and not only that, but also to write the gospel before he converts. So this is a remarkable event in human history, that you convert to a religion, but not a religion in a ready-made available sense. You first reconstruct it, reinvent it, write a book for it, and then convert to it. And so then towards the end of...
Was Ambedkar... Sorry, I am just, involved in this whole thought process. So was Ambedkar trying to be a utopian philosopher, because I'm not wanting to use the word utopia loosely, but to write a new gospel, to write a new Bible, to write a new book to follow. What would be that social strata of people of a particular social strata or group? Isn't he trying to vocalize the marginalized? Isn't he trying to vocalize the oppressed? Now, oppression, like if I would want to critique Ambedkar, I would probably take a position where, like he kind of sought the Indian society as homogeneous. Wouldn't this be one of the critique, that if we are only looking at...
If you want to pose your critique, that is a different thing. You ask a question to me, so I'm responding to that.
So then in Buddhism, like, the conversion is not happening to any other religion, but most people are converting to Buddhism, right? But Buddhism itself is again a way of life, and then it is also a religion.
No, I understand. So that is where I'm coming to. So more than a critique, I think the mammoth task is, basically, he is using the proper name Buddhism, which is also a name of a historical religion, but he's at once reconstructing and reinventing it, writing a new book. So to investigate what is the relationship between Navayana and the various strands of Buddhism which existed historically. So Hinayana, Mahayana, and Zen, and so many others. So how to separate the two? That, I think, is a major task. And secondly, how to not let the act of conversion be a mere ritualistic performative act, but an ongoing infinite process. So in a sense, how to rethink conversion for our times, where it doesn't become a mere finite act of moving from one religion to another. So I think that for me is the real challenge. So more than a critique, I would say he presents us with this challenge.
Agree.
How do you... So exactly. And then it's a challenge which is not just to somebody who is born Mahar, but to anyone who thinks rationally, critically, and the one who affirms universal principle. So it's in that sense a provocation or challenge to anyone. Though historically the sequence might have begun with lakhs of Mahars converting, now today the onus is on the rest. So that is where. And how do you transmit this desire to convert? At the same time, to extend its consequences. Because it is very easy to kind of reduce it to just a mere ritualistic act of conversion by taking vows and oath. But the real task is that and that is where I think your second question is very fascinating, that how do we now write basically the Panchashila or Ashtanga Marga for our times? The moral codes, so to say. Because again, there is a possibility of relapsing into rules. So how do we actually not make it a rule-bound moralist exercise, but reconnect it to the principles of liberty, equality, fraternity? So I think that is a mammoth historical task, I feel, is to write the ethics for our times. And for me, I think some of the crucial thinkers who help us to think that is starting from Immanuel Kant to Hegel to someone like Alabadio in our times. There are several others, but these are some of the representative names from the Western context, I would say. From within the Indian context, I would start with Jyotirao Phule. Jyotirao Phule and Sarvajanik Satyadharma. So that is a major guiding force. And then there is a long line from Phule to Ayoti Das to Ambedkar to so many. So those who are in a way rethinking Buddhism in our own times. Rahul Sankrityayan, for example.
Because one last point, Alia, if anyone has anyone raised a hand, because I'll just finish this final thought in my head, that, so essentially, when Ambedkar writes Annihilation of Caste, and he's been contested in the Congress, with his the position in the ontology that he stands with, okay. So when he says annihilation of caste, he doesn't say annihilation of religion. No,
he says both. He says because for him there is no separation.
There is no separation.
You can't annihilate caste without destroying this name Hinduism. Yeah.
Precisely. So then I'm just thinking aloud. The search of truth is absolutely moralistic then, and it can be without religion per se. And if that is the case, then my previous fellow colleague who raised the question that there is truth beyond, human, something which is tangible, and truth is intangible. I mean, it can be read without religion. Is it? Would you like to take a?
Yeah, of course. I think what Ambedkar proposes is that we have to rethink religion here. A lot of our historical baggage of thinking religion is inhibiting us to actually connect these two tasks. And why? Because we are restricting religion only on anthropological and historical plane. We are not proposing religion as an idea, as a universal idea. And he proposes religion as a universal idea, which is essentially commitment to universal principles, a certain fidelity. And in the light of that fidelity, bringing about subjective change and social change. This is the first point. So it's a certain force or intensity. So which takes us more beyond mere knowing the truth.
Correct.
So the love of the truth. So in a way, religion is that which inspires the love of truth. One could say religion in that sense. In fact, in Annihilation of Caste itself, he says something very interestingly that, and in Buddha and his Dhamma also, that either you break the rule or rule breaks you, right?
Correct.
Whereas
Correct.
the thing about principle is that it frees you, but the freedom also comes with a responsibility to abide by the principle, right? So this responsibility for him has an adjective which he calls religious. So to be responsible to the principle means to be religious. So this is, I think, the first part which I would like to propose, where for him religion is not a noun per se, but a certain adjective. So a religious responsibility, doing something religiously. And we also, in our everyday common language, use this, that to do something religiously. It's rigorously, passionately, single-mindedly, and so on and so forth. But the second question, which is really troubling him, that can I do this without using a proper historical name of a religion? Which is a question of the effectivity of actually truth on a historical plane. Can I do this simply by saying it
by itself?
Like, can I do it without name? Can I do it merely anonymously? And I think he comes to a very interesting conclusion. And this I'm taking off from Soumyavrata Chaudhary's reading. He says, yes, the anonymity of universal principles needs to be effectuated by names. So, so the principles are anonymous, but you need name to guard, protect, and effectuate those principles. Something of that kind. Because anonymity by themselves actually do not produce the effectivity.
And also we will not have followers, because if we want to really have a principle which is universal, then we need to have adherence towards it, and for which we need to have a common language.
Absolutely.
And for which,
And in another very interesting text, which is lesser read, called Buddha and the Future of His Religion, he says that we come to a point, particularly in 20th century, which is a point of human exhaustion on the religious plane. As in, there is a great effervescence of creativity on other planes, scientific, technological, so on and so forth. But it's very unlikely that at this juncture, we have a capacity to invent a new proper name of religion, which will have an effectivity the way, say, Buddhism had at once in history. So perhaps it would be prudent to draw upon any of those names which historically existed, and then in a way give it a new meaning, new content, new force. So something the image he uses in Buddha and his Dhamma is that instead of like what basically a lot of these political ideologies are doing, is that there is an old wine in new bottle. Right? What we need is a new wine in old bottle, something like that. That's the image he uses precisely.
Interesting. Yeah. Thank you, Vaibhav. Sure. Very nice. Thank you for this discussion.
Thank you, Rashmi, for the questions.
Thank you, Rashmi. Okay, so Kulsum is next, and anyone,
Sorry. I really love the discussion. I just wanted you to elaborate on one point, because I kind of missed that bit a little bit. That was the idea that philosophy is about seeking truth and religion is about the love of truth.
That's a quote from Philosophy of Hinduism, Ambedkar's text, where he says, philosophy is about knowing truth, not seeking, knowing truth.
Knowing truth. So how doesn't that, like, a love of truth apply to philosophy?
That's what I said, that Ambedkar actually splits philosophy into two. So the theoretical philosophy is where the mere knowing comes, but social philosophy is where love of truth also comes. So he affirms the second. So the way he's splitting the name religion into religion of rules and religion of principles, similar operation he's doing vis-a-vis the word philosophy, that he splits them into two. Yeah. Absolutely.
All right, that's all I wanted to ask.
So because he's in a way concerned with the word philosophy and its misuse, the way he's concerned with the word religion and its misuse. So he wants to kind of guard them in both.
All right, thank you. That's all I wanted to ask.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Kulsum. Pragya, you go next.
Hi, Vaibhav. So I have two questions. One is about the Brahmanism that you talked about, and how the Brahmanism that all part of Brahmaism. Yes, sorry, Brahmaism, which we are all part of, like one universal thing. Right. So how. But, and that's how it's not translated into a social world, social context. But, a lot of Hindus would probably say that the fact that there is no equality is related to your karma in the past. So that is one question. So what do you have comments on that? And the second is, Ambedkar had such progressive views about religion and about the effect it has. And he was obviously, he played a major role in our constitutional, in framing the constitution. I really wonder why he did not create a category called atheists or like no religion, because right now, if anybody quits a religion, it's really the first census that Britishers did. You had to, categorize yourself as some or the other bracket, but there's no way to leave and not be identified with, so there's no concept of trans religion, that, okay, I don't identify with the religion I was born with, and I also don't identify with any other. So I wonder why was that part not included? That's my second question.
Right. I think about the first question, one, in fact, can start with Buddha himself, because Buddha challenging the concept of soul and afterlife, because that was used as a foundation for inequality, for justification of inequality. So, which is why you would have these two traditions, the Vedic and the Avedic, right? And one of the crucial differences is around the whole question of afterlife. And afterlife as a justification for graded social inequalities, right? So the critique of the concept of soul comes from there. Right. And that critique has a deeper philosophical foundation, which is going to impermanence. Yeah. So how do we then establish an essence which outlives? Like at what is the threshold of separating body and soul? Right. So that is one. And it is linked with a certain idea of energy, that energy coming together and decomposing energy, rather than there being an essence which outlives. So that is, I think, how one would say that the Brahmaism and its equality and the justification of inequality by referring to past lives and the karma in past lives. So, which is why in Buddhism, there's a new concept of karma. And there's a very interesting discussion in Buddha and his Dhamma on this question, that the Hindu conception of karma and Buddhist conception of karma. So Buddhist conception of karma has something to do with the responsibility for one's own action. Whereas the Hindu concept of karma has something to do with karma baggage of karma from the past life. So this, I think, so in the Buddhist context, the karma can take you to nirvana in this life itself. So, which is why nirvana has nothing to do with that which is beyond or afterlife or after death. You can experience that here. So, I think this is the move already made in Buddha himself, and Ambedkar is trying to reconstruct it for us to clarify this as a doubt. The second question, which is a very interesting question, that why there is no separate category of atheism. And in your question itself, you were referring to like the role colonial state played in terms of making religious identity as a prime identity, which is an Orientalist move, that the non-Western societies are essentially religious in nature, so their prime identity is religious identity. So that is true. So that partly actually divides the field of Indian politics on religious lines, majority and minority and so on and so forth. And you are also compelled to choose because the religious identities are quite fuzzy, complex. So you can't really, like, there are many communities which can't simply be segregated as Hindus and Muslims, both in terms of their everyday life, their beliefs, in terms of ancestry, and so many other things. And I think what the category of atheism today means, right, in last, say, 25, 30 years, particularly speaking, and what it meant at the time of framing of constitution, there's a huge difference. So, see, today, we want to, again, affirm the category of atheist as an identity, not as a critical disposition, right? Because as a critical disposition, it is available even within Hinduism. That is what many Hindus would argue, that you don't need to be non-Hindu to be atheist. Yeah, because this is not a theistic philosophy and so on and so forth. There are currents of theist within the Hindu. That is one. And secondly, the atheism there had something to do with the modern scientific rational outlook, and the framers of the constitutions, at least partly those who were influenced by, say, a progressive faction within Congress, led by Nehru, believed that, and they truly believed that gradually a lot of these religious identities will cease to be important. And the important concerns will be economic and developmental. So religions are on the way of fading. So you don't have to create a separate category of atheism. Atheism will, in some sense, be a common sense of the future. This is one. Ambedkar's response would be quite interesting. He says, see, atheism is actually the foundation of being Buddhist. You cannot be Buddhist if you're not atheist. So it's not that atheism is one of the possibilities under the umbrella of Hinduism, but atheism is the beginning, but not the end. So for Ambedkar, what atheism lacks is a positive orientation. Yes, definitely it actually helps us kind of free from the baggage of the other world and the God. But does it help us come to the question, which is the relation between man and man, like how to solve? So does it have a social dimension, so to say? Because there is a tendency that atheism can become too individualistic, right? But the important part for him is that religion has to be a social force, which has to do with the relation between man and man. And that's where he felt that atheism can only be a beginning, which can uncouple this world and the other world. But in order to reconstruct and change this world, perhaps atheism is not sufficient. You need to supplant it with a proper name of religion. And I think this argument today you see being made by some of the exceptional European philosophers like Slavoj Žižek, for example. He says that in order to be Christian, you are atheist to begin with, because the God is already dead on the cross. So, oh, Father, why have you forsaken me? That is the atheist moment from which Christianity begins. So to be Christian is to be atheist in some sense. That is a true, rational, radical, egalitarian reading of Christianity, where it is, after the death of God on Christ, there is a possibility of a human community where the Son, who is human, is capable of resurrection. So anyone is capable of resurrection. So any mortal is capable. So resurrection is at the heart of Christianity, not him being the Son of God. So I think that is what I would say. But having a constitutional provision, today I completely understand where the question is coming from, would allow a certain kind of a freedom. But would that freedom have a bearing upon changing a society? I think that's a question. Like, would that identity mean securing certain rights and privileges in a negative sense, or kind of a freedom from encroachment by the others, like the compulsion to have a religion and not? So in that sense, it would be useful. But what would be its positive side? So, and the state I come from in Maharashtra, I see that there are annually some gatherings of the atheists. And there are certain organizations working towards that. So I believe that there is a general kind of a trend towards atheism as one of the possibilities. And I feel it comes because of last 20, 30 years global experience of religious fundamentalism. That a certain exhaustion with emancipatory potential and capacity of religion. That religion does not seem to have any redeemable features around us anymore, be it any religion. I'm not just talking about Hinduism here, but even with Buddhism. What happens to Sri Lanka and Myanmar? How can you now think about positively about Buddhism? Right? So I think that sense of exhaustion also is pushing a certain generation towards atheism. Whereas the framers of the constitution belong to a different generation, where some religions still contain a promise in some way. And that is, I would say, is a major challenge before us that Ambedkar leaves with, is that how to consistently maintain a separation between Navayana and whatever happens in the name of Buddhism. Like not to let those two things conflated. Yeah, to bring about separation within the field of Buddhism itself. So which is why I think the major debate in Maharashtra today around conversion is that do we need priests for conversion? Can we completely do away with bhikkhus and sangha and chivardhari and all the ritualistic aspect of it? Because there are so many conservative patriarchal aspects within Buddhism itself to how to separate from that, the moralistic aspect of it.
Yes. So I think in how Stephen Covey says that, there's a point where you're initially dependent and then you learn to be independent and then you become interdependent. So what you're saying is, in simple layman terms, that atheism will bring you to the independent stage, but it will not take you to the interdependent, and we have to figure out. But I think the only thing is that, there are still a lot of regressive inheritance laws or other laws that if you can't identify as a neutral person, you are still subjected to those regressive personal laws, which unfortunately, anyways, maybe in the future we'll have some category which has more like you said, universal principles of inheritance or
right. And I mean, to just add to what you say, interdependent, Ambedkar has a very interesting term for it. He would call it associated life in Annihilation of Caste itself, a certain social endosmosis. And sometimes he also calls it democracy. So perhaps there is some lead to think in that direction, that like more than a category, because see, today our preoccupation with category is where we are expecting law to deliver us those categories. But there is something else within the political field, which is a formation of subject and organization, which is not always a category identified by law or secured by law or protected by law. So we'll have to kind of uncouple our conception of politics from its over-dependent on state and law to kind of deliver us and protect us. So, like, how do you think at a distance from a state? Which is not to say that you oppose state or you be anti-state. That's not what I'm proposing. But Ambedkar, who was a law minister and prior to that, the chairman of the drafting committee, he actually assumes a certain distance from the state by the time he converts to Buddhism. Now, some would read that, is it a result of disillusionment or a fact that he's coming close to his death, a sense of exhaustion? No, I think he realizes that by middle of the 20th century, that state ceases to be that progressive force which it was in 19th century. So already we need to start reinventing politics, and he is saying this in relationship to the post-revolutionary state in Soviet Union, so Stalinist state. And I think the similar critique he would have vis-a-vis the post-colonial Indian state. That it has not sufficiently broken its ties from its colonial inheritance. And it has not started afresh. So some people use the Gramscian term for it like this is a passive revolution. Not a revolution which brings about societal change, but a revolution which brings about transfer of power. So, yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pragya. Reshmi?
Vaibhav, you inspire so many thoughts. Actually, Pragya's question is leading to that. Would you like to reflect on Weber's Protestant ethic and spirit of capitalism now that you started talking about Russian and this passive revolution, the Gramscian term? How would you reflect on Protestant ethic and spirit of capitalism by Max Weber? Something synonymous, some reflections on this.
I mean, in some sense, we can, if we look at it as a sociological and a historical text, then he is trying to, in some sense, understand that is there a cultural source to the emergence of capitalism? So in a way, the relationship between the societal, cultural, and economic spheres. And Ambedkar is also deeply interested in the relationship between the two. Instead of bracketing economic sphere as independent, autonomous sphere, having its own laws, in a way, like he wants to distance himself from this kind of a scientific way of approaching economy as an isolated domain. And he would want to embed it back within the socio-cultural, historical, political, and so on. So insofar as that, I think that text is a very important text. And even today, for us to understand that how certain dispositions were foundational to the emergence of capitalism.
Correct.
So dispositions which are internalized, habits which are internalized. So one could also read Weber along with, say, Foucault.
Absolutely.
Both of them are in a way trying to make sense of the emergence of a new subject. And
correct.
Yes, the post-enlightenment subject and its implication for science, for society, for economy, for politics, so on and so forth, and the institutions which it, a certain kind of rationalization it brings about. I think what Ambedkar is deeply interested in it, that if we want to bring about a communistic change, then we also need dispositional change.
Which is Bourdian, in fact.
Yeah, kind of Bourdian. Yes.
Bourdian.
Absolutely, like habitus. Yes.
Habitus. Absolutely.
So
would you like to, if you would have to pick up, reading Ambedkar and Foucault together, what would be the point of convergence?
In fact, I would say that first I started thinking about it after reading a fascinating short Marathi text by Aniket Zavre called Ambedkar and Foucault. It's yet to be translated.
Do they have in translation, English translation?
No, I don't think it has. But a lot of the insights are assimilated in Aniket Zavre's book called Practicing Caste, which was posthumously published. It is available in soft copy. So if you want, I can share that book.
Can you please kindly share also?
Yes.
Whenever you can.
Aniket Zavre actually started with Foucault's seminal text, Society Must Be Defended. So, So basically, Foucault's point there is that society is emerging as this new catchword, but there is no actual society on ground. There are groups fighting with each other. There is a civil war-like situation. In order to mask this civil war-like situation, you are saying that in the name of society, in the name of nation, you are trying to totalize it. So this kind of an imposition of totality masks the fact that there is no society. And this is exactly what Ambedkar says, that Hindu is not a society. It's an anti-social. These are gangs fighting with each other. Exactly, he uses these words. So in a way, and the larger implication Aniket Zavre draws from it, he says that perhaps we should start with this premise that we do not live in society, we live in groups, but we tend to project that there is a society. We are yet to arrive at society. We are in that sense pre-social stage. So for that, we need to develop first sociality, sociability, and from there on to move towards society as our horizon. And he says sociology as a discipline misled us in believing that there is already a society, but it was a conceptual object produced by sociology. It did not really met
a kind of field, a domain to a domain to interrogate, domain to explore.
Exactly.
They needed a subject and also separation from anthropology for that matter.
Absolutely.
They had to separate from political science and
Yes, exactly. So it's a critique of. So this book is a fascinating book which actually critiques the certain habits of thinking about caste. as a social category and so on. And it's a radical new reading of Ambedkar, and also displacing the whole question of caste as regulation on touch. So instead of presuming that caste has something to do with birth alone, he's saying because that reproduces this whole identitarian conception even within the anti-caste politics.
True.
That it starts mirroring the identitarian tendencies, which it's trying to break away from.
True.
Yeah. So how do we actually overcome the regulations on touch? So in a Bourdieuian sense, how do you create new habitus, new sociality? That could be the way further. And for Ambedkar, Buddhism would be an important social force in creating that habitus.
Yeah.
So
and also anything on gender? Would you like to share something? A position that he would have taken on gender?
Ambedkar's. No? In fact, Ambedkar's writing begins with his position on gender. So his anthropology seminar, Castes in India, says that a caste begins with the enclosure of class, and that enclosure is a result of endogamy. So regulation on women's sexuality, that is where in some sense caste begins.
Oh, wow. That is seminal. This is an important point. Because,
absolutely crucial point.
Yes, very crucial.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
And I think some of the contemporary writings on it, particularly Sharmila Rege's work on it, is fascinating to take us back to this point. And recently, V. Geeta has written a fantastic book which also emphasizes this, Ambedkar and the Question of Socialism. So V. Geeta's volume called Against the Madness of Manu.
Okay.
And also, I think her work on what one would call now Dalit feminism. So there are some papers which she's written in that direction.
Okay, I'm taking a note of these names because it will be helpful. Thank you so much, Vaibhav.
Thank you.
And really like great insights, because annihilation of caste usually is, because I also sometimes need this text to teach when because I teach sociology.
Oh,
and but the kind of insights and the position that you're taking in context of the philosophers, Western philosophers also, because we are also caught in this transmission and not, transmission or transfer of power and transfer of knowledge instead of revolutionizing knowledge. We still have it so much within, but we always juxtapose with Western thought process and, the ontology of the West. And so we are stuck there, and I think we will take some time, but this is a great departure. I think the way you are interpreting it, and I think it reminds me of Gopal Guru also, because he takes a very, very seminal position, although he extends the ideas, but he is also great departure. Thank you,
in fact, his own reading of Foucault in Archaeology of Caste, which is quite fascinating. Professor Guru's reading.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Reshmi. Anybody else who wants to ask a question or has a comment?
I just want to return to that very first question and about the transcendental and the God and the personal experience regarding the divine, because I feel that remain slightly unattended, and that is the heart of the matter, I believe, in some ways. So is the person who raised the question, is he still around?
Yes.
What was it? Was it Imran?
Yes,
no?
I'm here. I'm here. Hello.
Imran.
Hi.
Yeah. No, I would, in fact, want to suggest some texts which perhaps I would like to know how you're reading them. One is a text by Joluk Nancy. I'll tell you the exact name of the text.
Can you please type it in the chat box, please? Thank you. Just to give a context to my question, actually, I was also an agnostic, and I have had a horrifying journey since I have had these experiences. And since I came to know that there are people out there apart from us, maybe it's Saturn, if not God, but if someone is definitely there. So that experiences has completely changed my outlook. And again, I'm reading the text which I had read in my growing up, to know new readings of it after the experience.
Right.
That's all.
So, can I post it? Because I've typed it. Is it visible? How do I do this?
Just send it.
Yeah, you can either send a message to Behzad and I can forward it to the...
Okay, so it's called God, Justice, Love, Beauty, 4 Little Dialogues by Jean-Luc Nancy. Quite a fascinating text to begin with and very lucid, very accessible. These are actually lectures given to school children.
Okay.
So I completely agree that what to do with the personal experience, no doubt about it. But do we limit it to that, or do we take the discussion a little further than that? Because the personal experience can be both, can be absolutely intense and revealing, but at the same time could be limiting also, because the moment you say that it is personal, the part of it becomes unspeakable, non-transmissible.
Yeah.
Right.
Definitely.
So ineffable. So in that sense, there is a certain, one would say, indisputable aspect to that, which, for the lack of better word, we call mystical. Now, I think, with all due respect to mystical as an important part of our lives, our inner lives, what Ambedkar is truly interested in is that what are the effects religion may produce in the social field, a field which requires transmission, where the ineffable, and that is a dilemma which Buddha himself faced. So there is a chapter in Buddha and his Dhamma called "To Preach or Not to Preach." So when Buddha attained the enlightenment, he was faced with the dilemma that what I have attained, can it be transmitted? Because there will be a transmission loss. There will be a kind of confusion. The people may not be able to understand, because the moment I put it in word, its force will go away. Right. But then, like a true Platonist, he decided to return to the cave. So like the allegory of cave, you go and you're blinded by the light, by the insight, which is truly the beauty of the mystical experience. But then you take the risk to go back, to return to the cave and to transmit. And I think Ambedkar is interested in the second gesture, and which is why he wants to uncouple the question of religion from that of transcendence. I think that is what he's proposing us, that in order to have the transformative social effect of religion, this uncoupling is quite crucial. I think that would be like a good way to start. So it's not something which is a denial of transcendence, but reformulation of the question of transcendence. So Nancy kind of helps us in doing that. So what in the pre-modern period people would refer to as transcendence, we may have a different conceptual way to talk about it now. That transcendence was a very important fiction in order to ensure justice. Because people who were faced with kind of a hopeless world where there is no justice, it was an important fiction to sustain the promise of justice, transcendence. Also, on the other side, that when you were not scientifically equipped, it was an important fiction to make sense of the world. Now, today we need to reformulate that fiction and say that by transcendence, we need to say or affirm that or assert that we are not merely mortal, finite beings. We are capable of something which is infinite and immortal. So in order to, in fact, I'm completely with you that in order to challenge postmodernism, we need a new conception of truth, which is universal, infinite, immortal, and yet not transcendental or transcendence as its locus of origin, because you would want to couple truth with transformation. So societal transformation, structural transformation, collective coexistence. So that's what.
I agree with you. I just want to add one thing. Like, I agree with you when you say now, when you talked about truth in this world, the concept which you talked about, I completely agree with you. Well, when in the Supreme Court it's written, Satyamev Jayate.
Right.
So our society also values truth, Satya.
Right.
But the whole question about truth is such in our worldly. I'm also grappling with the question of truth. What is truth? Not in the transcendental form even. I'm grappling with the worldly truth.
Right.
So in this whole cave, in this whole jungle of caste, and so much of people, and so many world, right? There's so many things which goes around in the world. So the truth is something which gets farther and farther away from us the more we try to look for it. But yet the truth is important, and the truth does not need to have to be transcendental truth. or the idea of truth as God, but truth as worldly truth, truth as me, truth as you. So yes, I agree.
Absolutely.
I'm there with you. Yes.
No,
Yeah.
maybe at a later point, if we can have a separate discussion of what could be the new concept of truth, and truth as a process and not as an object.
True.
No, object
Even
to be
I was
arrived
just
at,
thinking.
or so as a subjective process.
Yeah, definitely.
Because I think in this session it's difficult to unpack the various layers of what we can today mean by truth. Yeah, what truth is a name of in that way.
Thank you so much. It was really a very nice talk.
Yeah, no,
Very rich.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Imran, and thank you so much, Vaibhav. My 2-year-old is here to co-moderate the session with me. But thank you so much, Vaibhav. I think Rashmi's term, the term Rashmi used, a very thought-inspiring session is actually the word to describe the session to a T. Thank you so much for that, and we would surely love to be in touch with. Okay. He's here and I have no option.
Oh.
So we would love to be informed about your work, any work that you're doing. Yeah. It would be great if you let us know and we'll share it with the students.
Sure. Absolutely.
Yeah, so that's it.
Love to do that.
Yeah, thank you so much
If
once
you
again.
screen your films or something, we would like to really see the perspective through which you actually look through the lens. Because now you're not looking through the lens,
Right.
So when you look through the lens, then there is an interruption in between.
Absolutely.
And whether your perspective differs, it'll be really, really interesting to watch a film or something of yours, documentary.
Absolutely. So
Pragya, this is a request.
So yeah, maybe I don't know where all of you are situated. If it is in one city like Delhi, then it is much easier to organize a screening or something if I'm coming there. Are most of you from Delhi, in and around Delhi, or from different parts?
Yeah, we are from different parts of the world, and we are from different parts of India. But if you ever have a screening in Delhi, we would love to be a part of it.
Sure.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I'm so sorry about the doctor.
Share my maybe can you share my email? I'll just write my email here.
If you're not able to, you can just share it with Behzad and he'll forward it to the group.
Okay. I'll do that. I'll message to Behzad. Okay.
Yeah, and about the doctor, you are friends with one of my professors, Dr. Irfan Faruqi.
Oh, absolutely. We've been.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's how I thought both of you are friends, and maybe both of you are studying for a PhD.
No, he ended up being doctor. I did not. I exited. Yeah.
Okay, you did. So you were studying.
We were together.
For a PhD.
Though I was not in sociology. He was in sociology. I was in international relations. He was senior to me by a few years, but at some point I kind of exited.
Yeah, so that's where the confusion started.
Okay, no worries.
Okay, thank you so much once again. See you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.